Female-founded businesses actually have a higher rate of return, better profit margin, and actually more sustainable in the long run.
In Asia or Southeast Asia, where women usually have to take a back seat in their career, and with startups it comes with a lot of risk, a lot of uncertainty, and where you have all these obligations at home, we usually find that women are less inclined to go forward and take the risk.
The reality is that we can't be what we can't see. So a very big component of actually accelerating female talent and diverse talent into leadership roles is having really vocal female role models.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. DEI, an acronym for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's among the most talked about movements in business and politics. But are companies and businesses truly embracing the goals behind DEI, especially when it comes to gender equity? So to find out more, we are joined by two business leaders in their fields. From Sydney, we have Sarah Leung, the Managing Director and founder of TDC Global. Her consultancy helps organizations implement diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. And from Singapore, we're joined by Zelia Leong, the co-founder of PraisePal, an employee recognition and rewards platform. I'm going to start with you, Sarah, first. You became a regional brand manager at one of the world's largest beauty companies by the age of 25. And seems like you were on a great career track, yet you decided to break away, and eventually that led to TDC Global. Can you tell us why?
So I actually started my career in the world of marketing and branding, and actually started with a WPP agency, and then moved in-house and specialized in luxury beauty marketing. And exactly to your point, my career was on a fantastic trajectory, actually accelerating and advancing in a really fast pace. However, as I was sort of working in corporate Australia, I was actually confronted by the lack of diversity and inclusion in corporate Australia. There were just a lot of inequities and sort of pay gap between people of different ethnicity, cultural background, and particularly in the gender space that I uncovered as I was moving through my corporate career. So I actually gave myself a year, and I said, I'm going to try and take it upon myself to find a solution for this problem in a year, and see how far I can go. And so that year I started TDC Global, and within that year we secured global clients to support them on the journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and managed to grow the business by over 386% in that year. And so the rest is history, and within a few years we have been fortunate to be named one of the top 10 DEI consulting firm in the APAC region, supporting multinational organizations such as Amazon Web Services, Coca-Cola, Asahi, etc., across the APAC region to help them bridge gender sort of equity issues and help them build best practices in diversity and inclusion.
Right, and a little later in the program, I want to talk about how that translates into the work environments for women, or acceptance of women, especially in the higher positions in the corporate structure. But Zelia, I want to talk about PraisePal, and we will do that a little bit further in the program. But first, I want to talk about your position with ACE Singapore. I believe you're the chairperson for the Women's Committee. Can you tell us what that means and how you're using that to help women in the workplace?
Definitely. So ACE Singapore, ACE SG, is the national voice for Singapore's startup ecosystem. It's a trade association with Singapore's Minister for Manpower, Dr. Tan See Leng, as our patron. So we help Singapore startups, to grow, to elevate them, provide them with resources, as well as foreign startups who are interested to land and expand in Singapore. But we realized that despite the very high women employment rate in Singapore, 77%, only 7.2% of startups are led by female founders. So ACE has set up the Women Entrepreneurship Committee to help, and our mission is to level the playing field for women in Singapore startups by amplifying, representation, providing them access to resources. We do events, we do community initiatives, and we recently did our first female founders retreat in Ho Chi Minh City, where everyone can get together, connect, and build community and support each other, kind of like therapy.
Much needed, Zelia, especially if it's only 7.2%. That is a very low and troubling figure, which leads me to you, Sarah. You mentioned that your business has been growing. Does that naturally mean that companies and decision makers are now starting to acknowledge the need for inclusion?
Absolutely. So I would say the growth of our company is actually a direct reflection of the maturity of different organizations. I think a couple of things are driving this growth in the DEI segment. Number one is actually maturity in the market. So compared to, let's say, 6, 8, or 10 years ago, where DEI is not even a concept that gets talked about, I think it's really evident that the maturity of DEI and the understanding of that across the market is now at a much more matured space. Of course, obviously, a long way to go still, but we have come, a very significant step ahead. The second thing I would say is government and compliance policies driven. So I think in all regions across the world, except with the exception of US, that seems to be going back a little bit these days, especially across, APAC region where we specialize in, there's actually a high level and increasing level of government compliance issues and policy regulations requesting large organizations to be disclosing and also providing plans around how to bridge gender pay gap and reporting their female leadership representation data. And the third and probably most important one is the shifting expectation of the workforce. So what employees expect these days are very different to what they were expecting and asking and demanding of organizations before.
So let's put what you've said into reality using Zelia's experience. Zelia, first, can you tell us a little bit more about PraisePal and what it does? And this is not your first startup, so can you explain how different the landscape in Singapore is for women and for you in particular from when you had your first startup to when you launched PraisePal?
Definitely. So at PraisePal, we make software, like what Sarah said, the workforce expectations are shifting. People want to feel more engaged, more connected, that their work has meaning and they're part of a larger team, not just a cog in a machine. So we make software that helps managers and companies to keep their teams engaged and motivated with automated employee recognition, rewards, and incentives. So the shift is actually a lot about visibility, because even if you look at the corporate world globally, Fortune 500 companies, female leadership, it's really, really small amount. And that also boils down to, family, other factors, especially in Asia or Southeast Asia, where women usually have to, take a back seat in their career. And with startups, it comes with a lot of risk, a lot of uncertainty, and that is why we have good innovation. And when you have all these obligations at home, we usually find that women are less inclined to go forward, take the risk. And that is what we notice not only in Singapore, but around the world.
Well, starting your first business is a challenge for anyone, but that is especially true for women trying to break into male-dominated industries like technology. Our producer, Fred Xie, caught up with Xian Ping, a software engineer, to get her story on navigating chauvinism, among other obstacles.
还会跳掉吗？就是不会跳掉。好，我们再处理一下。我家人不支持我创业，我爸妈都是公务人员家庭，然后所以他们觉得稳定就好。然后为什么你要去走一条很艰辛的路？有吗？啊，新人的名。
By the time Xiangping left her highly paid job to start her own business, she had over a decade of experience in technology. Still, venturing out on her own was seen as too big of a leap of faith by her family. But as an entrepreneur and a software engineer, Xiangping was used to challenges. At this workshop in the heart of Taipei, the ET Tech founder is helping hairdressers understand how her services can help them overcome common challenges in the industry.
主要做的产品是美发业的这个 SaaS 平台，我们从设计师端助理到店家，我们会有一系列的解决方案啊，跟整合式的一些系统。然后我们主要是从客户的预约啊，然后到他背后的 POS 结账的，我们有一系列的解决方案。
重叠胖胖。
你没有见？啊，你有吗？当时我在刚开始在创业的时候，然后我有一次在跟员工聊天的时候，他有提到就是说，在他觉得就是女生工程师为什么 比较少的原因是他觉得女生的逻辑能力没那么强。然后我就想说你为什么会有这样子的想法？就是社会氛围是这样子的想法。女生在这个时代创业会被大家说，其实有更好的是女生的心思比较细腻，对，然后你去做创业的时候，跟男生思考的点可能比较不一样，就是这时代是男女平等嘛，然后女生也可以去追求自己想做的事情。其实大家常常在说女力，就是其实这个时代创业，女生创业这件事好像有被看见了。
For the full version of that video, do visit our YouTube channel or the TaiwanPlus website. Now, Sarah, two things stood out to us in Xianping's story. Firstly, her parents were worried about job stability, and they were not supportive initially. And secondly, in this story, her manager doubted her ability to handle difficult tasks simply because she was a woman. How much does this resonate with your experience and with the companies you're working with?
So I could not actually resonate more with the story. So I think particularly coming from, Asian upbringing, where the expected career trajectory is that you graduate with good grades and then get a secure job in a maybe multinational organization and then just progress through that. That was very much my parents' expectation. I think, starting out, starting your own business, given that neither of them are actually business owners, felt like a very foreign concept. And especially at the time when DEI wasn't really much of a known concept, and that added another layer of complexity and I think ambiguity around what exactly is that you are giving up your career for. And I would say it wasn't actually until like a few years in that my parents actually really started to understand a little bit more about what I do. And it wasn't really until that I was actually able to demonstrate pretty significant and measurable successes, winning awards and actually, starting to make significant, financial gains that they are now saying, that was a great idea in hindsight. And so I think definitely resonate, with myself, my own journey, and very much the entrepreneurial stories that I see around me.
What about you, Zelia? I saw you nodding over there. One, about expectations on women in particular, going and venturing out on their own and taking these big risks, as you mentioned. But secondly, about managers in particular, or people like business leaders that you're approaching who see you as a woman in the tech space. Is there any kind of skepticism you face or you feel women in Singapore face?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is you don't know why you did not get a job. Right? Because if you go in for an interview, the manager will not tell you why you did not get hired. So there might be many other opportunities I missed out on because of, just my gender alone that I don't know about and that many other women out there don't know about. So the perception is also tied to, again, visibility, which is why we are looking at increasing representation, visibility. And it's also super cool that now there are more role models stepping up, women leaders in really difficult to penetrate industries that we managed to find and tell everyone, hey, she's doing this really cool thing that we didn't know. And she has been doing that for the last 30 years. So we want to bring out more of these examples to make sure that women don't judge other women, which also happens.
Yes, I really want to echo Zelia's point there, because there are three things that we know are that to be barriers between women and leadership roles. And these three things specifically are structural barriers, visual barriers, and cultural barriers. So structural barriers is exactly to her point that, hiring processes or promotional processes are actually built with inherent biases in there that we are actually not aware of. And so, for example, you might have, really competent female talent interviewing for promotion, but because their career trajectory and the way they present themselves is actually different to what the hiring manager, maybe like a male leader might be expecting or might be familiar with, and therefore they didn't really know how to benchmark that talent across their hiring measure. So not having the right structure in place that's truly inclusive and equitable could become a barrier for female advancement. And the second thing that also Zelia talked about is the visual barrier. the reality is that we can't be what we can't see. So a very big component of actually accelerating female talent and diverse talent into leadership roles is having really vocal female role models. A lot of times I sometimes get female entrepreneur, that tells me, I don't want to highlight the fact that I am a female entrepreneur. And I actually say that's your responsibility, because now you've got a seat at the table and you need to very much make sure that you open that door and create another seat for opportunity for others. And so there's so much significance in having visual representation of people like us succeeding and sharing that story. And last but not least is that cultural component. So the cultural component is actually creating a more widely accepted cultural phenomenon, both at home and at work and in the society, around celebrating women in leadership roles, or maybe men taking parental leave. So just breaking down societal taboo that are very often associated with, women occupying leadership roles, and making that more of a commonplace that's accepted and celebrated by all.
And from the startup story, Zelia, what part of that really resonates, especially with women setting out to become entrepreneurs? When we talk about women in a corporation, often it is systemic, where you have the HR and the boss and they have certain perceptions. But as a startup or someone trying to break into the business space, what is it that you feel could be the biggest barrier?
One of the biggest barriers, even if you're a woman, you're men, regardless of your gender, again, it's the risk, because high risk, high reward. But in somewhere like Singapore, where it's so expensive to live, you need money, you need salary, and most people are afraid to take the leap when they have family obligations. How do you start something you don't even know will work? With no money, you might have to go a couple of years without pay. How do you feed your family? And with the women's responsibility and role in the family, that gets even more challenging for them without the right support, because they are expected to stay home, especially if you don't have any help. And like Sarah mentioned, the gender pay gap, which means women usually earn less than their counterparts or their husbands at home. So if someone has to take a back seat at their career, usually it's the woman. So it's a cycle, and we hope to break that with more visibility, representation, and structural changes.
Right. And Sarah, I'd like to get a little bit academic here. Your organization recently conducted a study titled DEI Deep Dive APAC, APAC's Path Forward. Can you give us a brief overview on your research and what you found?
Sure. So what we did in that research was that we surveyed over 1,400 business leaders across the APAC region to understand, one, where is the future of DEI and how does that tie into their business objectives? And what we found was that the top 3 key challenges faced by business leaders are customer satisfaction and retention, operational efficiency and productivity, and employee engagement and employee retention. And the one common enabler and solution that can help accelerate and bridge any opportunities around these 3 areas and overcome these 3 business challenges is actually diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they actually help you attract and retain customers, as we've seen in the research, and create more innovation to increase productivity, and more importantly, help increase employee engagement by as much as anywhere between 70 to 80%. So one is that we've established through the research that DEI is absolutely fundamental to business success. And the second thing is actually the increased investment we'll see in the DEI space across businesses over the next 3 years. So synonymously across all different market, the one thing that they can agree on, the one commonality across all the different market, is that over 93% of organizations will see their investment in DEI either remain the same or increase over the next 3 years.
Now, small and medium-sized businesses are the backbone of Taiwan's economy. However, securing funding can look very different for men and women. Vivi Wang, the COO of Next Voice Tech, shares an outlandish request she received while seeking investment. Take a listen.
第一个，我们募资，我觉得没有男性投资人容易。然后第二个，像我们公司在募资的时候，我就曾经被传统投资人问到说，那你要签下一个合约，3年不交男朋友、不结婚、不生孩子，我才愿意投资给你。 那近几年台湾其实有非常多就是针对女性创办人的一些培育计划或者是资金的赞助。不过呢，我觉得以整体的创业环境来说，比例上还是非常少的。像我们现在很多的新创的一些团体或是活动，我们可以观察到男性创办人还是远远的多于女性创办人。那其实背后的原因不光是女性创办人她背后的家庭愿不愿意支持她，她的先生或者她的另一半愿不愿意支持她，我觉得这都是我们这个时代的女性还是需要去克服的一些困难的问题。
Sarah, how prevalent is this kind of a situation? Perhaps maybe not so the contract, as Zelia said, that is very unusual, or we hope it's very unusual, but especially in places like Japan where you do a lot of your work.
Yeah, I would say, unfortunately, it's not unusual at all. I think, to have it stipulated in the contract is taking it a step too far. But I would say probably more often than not, female founders do get asked that question. On a conscious level, there's this like a bias. It's not even unconscious, it's outright conscious bias, assuming that female founders, once they either enter motherhood or start to have caring responsibilities, their commitment to their business will decrease. I think from what I've seen, it's actually mostly to the contrary. They feel like they need to actually support their family, and they become even more efficient because they need to multitask. And we also know that there's been so many literatures and research and white papers around that demonstrate that female-founded businesses actually have a higher rate of return, better profit margin, and actually more sustainable in the long run. But the reality, I will add another layer, is that because the investor segment are mostly male, they genuinely sometimes don't understand the problem or the business that female founders are trying to solve and create. And I'll provide an example. That is, I now also sit on the other side of the investment table, being a limited partner in venture capitals. And there's been pitch presentations of a boat cleaning device versus a device for breastfeeding to reduce the pain. And in this almost all male investor panels, they decided to go for the boat cleaning device. And the reason is that they felt the breastfeeding device could be too niche. Can we just take that for a moment? When you have a device that actually impacts all the mothers and newborns versus compared to boat owners, you tell me which one is more niche, right? They just lack a deeper sense of appreciation of the problem women are trying to solve or the problem that women are facing. And therefore, what it leads to is actually an incomplete picture of investment decisions.
Right. So on that note, Zelia, you started off as a founder quite young. What kind of perhaps resistance did you face when you were looking for funding? And do you believe, or do you feel, in a society like Singapore, where it seems that there is far more equity than other parts of Asia, women still have a harder time than men in getting funding?
Yes, definitely. So again, I don't know, when people reject me, what's the reason? But the statistics don't lie. And women, again, only get single-digit funding as compared to the rest of the companies being funded in Singapore. So the resistance is high for all the reasons Sarah mentioned. It could also be because sometimes as women, we are not so confident to ask for money. The usual joke that it's actually a fact. If you see a job description and a male only fits 60% of it, he will apply for it. But if a woman fits 80% of it, she will not apply for it because she's not confident enough.
Yeah, sadly, confidence is one of the main things I feel like that really, truly needs to be addressed, because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, Taiwan sees itself as a beacon of freedom in Asia, often taking a more progressive stance compared to its neighbors. However, climbing the corporate ladder remains challenging for women. According to a 2023 report by the Financial Supervisory Commission, the number of women sitting on the boards of publicly listed companies in Taiwan stood at less than 16% in 2022. That's up from just over 12% in 2012. Sarah, firstly, what is your take on these boardroom figures in Taiwan, why we're not seeing a more rapid increase? And Japan's is only slightly higher than Taiwan's, but there has been quite a dramatic rise over the past few years. Can you give us shed some light on that?
Sure. So I would say Japan being one of our largest market, one of the key driver for this accelerated change. And again, I'll caveat that by saying still a long way to go. But what we're seeing an accelerated rate of change is that there's a government regulation requiring all companies with 300 or above employees to be disclosing their female leadership representation, board representation, and also pipeline increase, right? And also recently they've included the gender pay gap disclosure requirement as well. And in Australia, we see similar requirement requiring ASX listed companies to report on their gender representation. So I think the reality is that what gets measured gets done. And so I want us to think about that for a minute. If we want to see progress and improvement, a lot of times we need external pressure, shareholders, from government, from industry bodies, as well as actually employees asking and demanding and requesting and voicing that. But what I will also add is that a lot of times we mistaken conversations with progress, but that's noise, that's conversation, that's dialogue, which does not necessarily equate to progress. And this data point that you've showed is actually, speaks directly to that. So I would say that one thing to help enable the conversation and take that forward in a very meaningful way is to help break through the noise and always look at data, progress, and have some of those measures embedded in executive bonuses and incentives on a corporate level is something that we've seen with a lot of impact and direct ROI in seeing improvement to those numbers.
Great. Thank you both so much. I'm afraid we've run out of time. There's Zelia Leong from PraisePal, co-founder of PraisePal. Thank you for speaking to us from Singapore. And Sarah Liu, managing director and founder of TDC Global, speaking to us from Sydney, Australia. Thank you both so much. And for our viewers everywhere, it has been good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you'd like to add to the dialogue, do join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.